Are you a zucchini bread guy? I love zucchini bread. My wife
Uh-huh.
makes an awesome zucchini bread, and she puts chocolate chips in it, which I think makes virtually
Whoa.
almost anything good.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's the
I
way to
hadn't
go.
really thought to start that way, but let's just jump right into it because I think my son came home with these
Yeah.
giant zucchinis. Like
Ooh.
they were like inhumanly large, two of them. And if I had the wherewithal, I would put a picture of it up here, but I don't.
Sure.
Uh,
We'll do
and
it in post.
what happened is we rent a house, so my
Hmm.
wife had to do a little bit of hand grading to get it graded
Okay.
down, and then she was able to put that into a bread, which was very
Nice.
delicious. I enjoyed it quite a
Nice.
bit. So yeah, I hadn't had zucchini bread in a while. My grandma used to make banana nut bread all the time,
Oh
which is
yeah.
good,
Yeah.
fresh out of the oven with like
Oh yes.
equal parts butter and fresh made bread is
Right.
what I
100%.
enjoy the most. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a buttery delivery vehicle for some people.
Well, I wanted to have you here on one of our Tanzu Talk streaming live whatever episodes to talk about. Now you can't see this because, but I'm using the magic of streaming. I have just put a picture of your book up over our
Oh,
heads.
fantastic.
Yeah. Now
My
this
my
book,
wife would call it a
a
pamphlet, to be
pamphlet. You can see
fair.
the previous pamphlet there in purple, and
Oh yeah, it is. That's right. Yeah,
yeah,
it is over my shoulder.
yep. So now you got responsible microservices. Now, like a good host, I read this hurriedly this morning before we were talking, which I think is the proper rate
But
to
it's a
read any
pamphlet,
book.
so it's short. You can get it done in a
Yeah,
short amount of time.
yeah. And so tell me, Nate, how would you
Yes, sir.
describe what's going on with this book? What are you trying to encapsulate here?
Well, so this is a prose variant of a talk that I've been giving for the last year and a half on sort of the principles that we use with clients on should that be a microservice. Now, those of you who've been paying attention know that that started as a blog post
Mm.
back in the day, and it occurred to me that putting this into a nice handy PDF would be very useful for folks, and then it makes people happy that they can market behind it. But it's just there's so much chatter about how to do microservices. There's not enough about when should we do microservices. And you and I have talked about this. One of my all-time favorite tweets actually is yours about year one. Oh my God, this technology is amazing. Year two, actually, this is really hard.
Uh
Year
huh.
three, you should probably never use this technology. Year four, oh look, something shiny and new. And microservices are very much a part of that. We've seen a lot of people jump on that bandwagon because some tech companies are doing it, so now everybody's got to do it, and then people are going, wow, actually this is kind of difficult. And so this is really the kind of advice that we try to give people on when does this make sense, and I would say more importantly, when does it not make sense. Not everything needs to be a microservice.
And I think the other thing that comes through that's nice is there's well, let me ask you if this is intentional, but I almost feel like it's here's the current thinking about running microservices as well, right? Like there's I was thinking, I don't know, I don't keep up with the microservices trades like I used to, so I don't follow them, but like I don't often see SRE and microservice mentioned in the same area, right? And
Right, which is
I don't know.
unfortunate.
Is that am I just behind the times? Do those things commonly are the SRE people talking to the microservice people and back and forth? What's going
I
on
hope
there?
so. I mean, I hope so, because if you're going to have these highly dynamic environments that all have services coming in and out of existence and changing rapidly, there's a whole lot of stuff you need to make that work, or else it's just going to be painful. And I do think, honestly, that's part of the struggle a lot of people have with
Mm,
microservices is they're so focused on, oh, look, I made some APIs, and then they didn't think about the fact that, well, how do we monitor this, and how do we have alerting in place? What kind of an environment is this running in? Can we support that environment? you
yeah,
know and that's a huge part of the challenge that comes along with this. Do we have the automation in place so that when I need to make a change, I can get that change into production quickly and safely? It's always making sure we have both of those pieces together, and that's part of the whole challenge here, is making people see the bigger picture beyond just, oh cool, now I can put microservices on my resume.
yeah, and in that area that as I was reading through, so you get into like you visit all the old favorites. You got the circuit breakers, and other things like that. And even I think in there might have been another place, but in one of the longer but rare passages of code in the book. Not a lot of code in there. Lots of thinking, which is
I'm an
nice.
architect, so it's boxes and diagrams, buddy. That's it. It's
Exactly.
just arrows and boxes and all that fun stuff.
Exactly. And so there's basically some code of how to do like a circuit breaker in Spring stuff.
Yep.
And I was thinking, and then you go on to talk about how like service meshes. I think you managed to only say service mesh once in the book because I searched for mesh, which was fun.
Yes, yeah, and
And
that's I think Rohit's fault that I had to put it in there once. So we'll blame
yes.
Rohit for that one.
And so I was thinking, like, with all the talk of, Istio and service meshes and Kubernetes and all this stuff, like, when do you put a circuit breaker in your code versus just in, like, a sidecar or whatever, right? Like, and because, let me ask the question and just make one more statement. It seems like, not that this has ever happened in programming before, but we're like, unless we kind of don't get a handle on it, sometime in the next 5 years, we're going to be right back in the position where every single layer duplicates every single pattern, and you're relying on some overlay thing to basically
Right.
write a bunch of configuration that sets all of those things up and down the patterns so that they're
Right.
synchronized.
Well, I mean, I don't think you're wrong, right? I mean, we do that a lot in this industry, and I think part of it is we we don't know where all this stuff is necessary or where it adds value until we've
Mm.
actually tried it and used it, experimented with it, and then we start to figure this stuff out. And I talk about this in sort of my thinking architecturally material, but trial and error is how we learn as a species. And you think about so much of what we do in software. Software's been what, a human generation at this point, maybe.
Mm.
Compare that with other stuff we've been doing for millennia, and we still screw some of that stuff up. So I think we need to be a little forgiving of ourselves in software that we don't have all the answers yet because we haven't been doing this very long. And unlike building houses where we're using the same materials we've used for hundreds if not thousands of years, we're using stuff that we invented earlier this week, and then people are shocked that we don't know exactly how this is all going to turn out. And so I
Exactly.
think some of that's natural. It's like, oh well, geez, we tried putting load balancing here and that didn't work. Well, let's try putting load balancing over here. Oh, hey, there we go. So we'll figure this out as we progress, and we'll get bigger and bigger abstractions, and there'll be more Lego blocks that we can piece together. I think we lose sight of some of those Lego blocks we already have. Think about the original Gang of Four Patterns book. How many of those patterns are just baked into the languages and frameworks that you use every day?
Mm.
It's become just the undergirding part of the tools that we use. And you're going to see the same thing as we progress forward. It's like, oh wow, these distributed architectures demand certain things from us. Well, let's just sort of encapsulate that and code that into this framework or language or however you want to phrase it, and now it's just there. You don't have to think about it anymore. To me, that's a huge win. That's what we'd like to see.
Yeah, yeah. So it's sort of open and flexible at the moment. You might
Of
want to put
course it
your
is.
circuit breakers in some Kubernetes thing, or you might want to put it over here in your Spring thing, or no one's quite sure. It seems like I haven't done the exercise, but there are some obvious sort of like this belongs in the system or the platform versus this belongs in the application code that you can start to draw out. But
Right.
as always, it's fun to find those things on the edge, on the
Sure.
margins.
Or where it blurs, where the distinction isn't clear cut, or it isn't obvious. Should it be here or there?
Yeah.
I mean, you and I've talked about this before, but the one answer that I can give to almost every question is it depends.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's challenging, especially when I think about this from an architectural standpoint as an architect. The a friend of mine likes to say that architecting, or being an architect, however you want to phrase it, it's the stuff you can't Google. Because by the time the questions get to that sort of architect area, there isn't an obvious answer, or else already would have been answered.
Right.
So if this was just an easy design decision, well, there's no reason to involve architect. If it was already solvable, again, no reason to involve architect. So by definition, these are harder questions to answer, and we got to kind of grind through the possibilities. And hopefully we're making good decisions. We'll know in a year or two, I guess, and we'll see what happens.
So maybe architects do things that haven't been turned into frameworks yet. That's
Yeah, that's another way of thinking about it.
it,
A couple of
it's
friends of mine are
it's parts of programming that hasn't been automated yet. That's the
Yeah, well,
architects
it's
are left
like
sitting
what I
in that.
said. My friend Neil likes to call it the things you can't Google, and there's a lot to be said for that. It's the hard parts in a lot of
Mm.
ways, and
Yes.
that's a constantly evolving thing. There was a time before NiGuard coined the whole circuit breaker thing. We didn't, have a circuit breaker. Now everyone's like, well, of course we need a circuit breaker. So it's fascinating how that stuff changes.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at the circuit breaker thing in a while, and I think one of the fun things about it is the idea that a piece of code should know when it's in a good state or not, which is
Right.
like it's simple, a simple idea, but I don't think that's necessarily something that is part of how most programmers think about writing their code. That like it should be like self your chunk of code should be self-aware of itself and like
Right.
know if it's good or not. It's more
Right.
like if an error occurs, just like freak out. That tends to be the mode. Like just it's sort of like the like the 7-year-old mode of operating. If
Right.
everything's fine, you just operate. If anything goes wrong, just
Throw
sit
exception.
down and cry and yell really loud, and then
That's basically code in a nutshell, Cote.
that's right.
As usual, you've captured and given us a vision that
Instead of what the parents of the world would like, which is like
right.
if you haven't found the TV remote yet, you
Use your
need to
words.
you need to keep looking because
Right.
sitting here and crying that you haven't found it is not going to cause the TV remote to be found. You must.
Is that a universal thing? Because I've got a 13-year-old and I cannot tell you how many times he'll ask where is something, and I or my wife will basically say, well, where did you look? He said, I looked everywhere, and then
Uh,
we'll literally walk to right where it is. Like, you mean this right here that's on the table that's in
yeah,
plain sight?
yeah,
Well, I didn't see it. Like,
yeah.
I guess
You
that's
know,
kids.
yeah. No, I think it is universal, and it is the universal reply to that is universally unhelpful. Like I did this the other night. I need to figure out how to share pictures here because I could show these pictures, but like I had asked my son to find a towel for whatever reasons. And
Sure.
then my wife was putting him to bed, and I went downstairs to close some doors, and I saw a towel on the floor that was his towel, and he had told me he had looked in that exact spot. So I took a picture of it, and then I went upstairs and I showed it to him, and the pedantic educational lesson that my son learned from this, zero. Just that dad's
Right.
weird. Like there was no.
Dad will get the towel if I miss
Yeah.
it.
It felt like a real
Well,
enterprise architect moment where I was sort of like
absolutely.
you sort of like
Absolutely.
showing someone that something was done in a way that I thought was insufficient or not
I,
good.
I had a very similar experience last night. I was doing laundry and I asked my son specifically, please get me all of your soccer stuff. And so he brings up his laundry and he says, yeah, I put that on top. And I'm looking, I'm like, well, where's your socks? Where's your compression shorts? Oh, those are still downstairs. And I'm like, but did you catch the part where I specifically said not like 5 hours ago, not 3 days ago, but like literally like 10 minutes ago, please go do this. And
Mm.
then, it's joy. Although I will say this much, my wife and I went for a bike ride yesterday morning and we planned on starting our sheets before we left, but we forgot. But my wife left our son a note saying, hey, we're out on a bike ride. Please take the sheets out of the washing machine and put them in the dryer. He did that, but of course the sheets hadn't actually been washed. And so I asked him, did you notice the sheets weren't wet? And he said, no, I didn't. So
Hmm.
I don't know. My wife would call that a
Mysterious.
boy look.
So
Yes,
I think
exactly.
this is a good way to kind of mesh these two worlds together, right? Because what we're talking about here is governance, right?
Yes.
Governance and guidance. Now, I once heard from a enterprise architect that they wanted to move from policing to partnering. Now,
Ooh, I like that
in
phrasing.
in the area
Good
of
alliteration.
parenting, I don't know, like it's only every now and then where you're supposed to think of partnering with your children. Often, that kind of comes about, and then everyone realizes like, no, they need to be parented, not partnered with,
Right.
right? Now, there's another concept I want to throw into the table smoothie here, and that is this concept called like servant leadership, right?
Mm,
And I think there's a little bit of a whiff in your book, if that's a
okay.
word that still is okay to use, of like servant architectureship. Like where like you're like, you know, if I can read a little bit, I'm trying to be like cool podcast interviewers and read passages that people have written to them. So this is the second time I've done it. We'll see how it goes.
All
But
right.
somehow, somewhere on page 50, you're like, you want to provide adequate guidance to your teams to help them make the right technology choices. And I love this. Decision trees are invaluable. Now, decision trees are one of these things, and you go on to talk about how the genius of a decision tree is it limits options, right? Which I
Right.
think that's a good genius counter move, is to realize if someone has given you a set of decisions, decision one, decision two, or decision three, you should choose decision five, right? You should always just like go outside of what they've laid out for you. But anyways, this made me start thinking like of that policing partnering thing, where I think what we'd sort of like from enterprise architects nowadays is for them to be helpful rather than to show up and offer their help rather than show up and say this is how you must do it, right?
Right.
Instead of drawing the lines of where you have to operate and how the tools you need to use, the governance. I don't know, is there this notion now that you're sort of there to facilitate the teams doing the right thing instead?
So, I mean, to me, this is just a reality that as an architect these days, you're spread so thin,
Mm.
there's no possible way you can be involved in every single decision. It's just impossible. And to be clear, I as an architect, I don't want to be the single point of failure. I don't want to be this bottleneck on a team's progress.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good either. The challenge, of course, is how do we create that environment within which our teams can thrive and make, again, these good decisions. You want to make the right decision, the easy decision, and give them that guidance. And so the decision trees for me actually grew out of my previous job, previous company. I was sort of like cloud architect guy, and as we were bringing in all these new technologies, as we were evolving to the cloud, one of our senior architects came to me and said, Nate, we're bringing in all this new tech, which is great. We need it. That's awesome. But we really need to give teams help figuring out which of these three options should I use. They're all
Right.
three will work. Which one is the right one for me in this situation? And we recognize that those first 6 to 10 apps that are going to go through your cloud migration, they're going to have a lot of attention. They're going to have, architects are going to be hovering around it. You're going to put your senior team on it. You're going to put your best developers on it. It's got a lot of management attention.
Mm-hmm.
But then you got to open up the floodgates to the whole universe of your development core. And they're not going to have that same level of hand holding, that same level of, let's make sure we've got we got our business partners involved. We got our technical partners involved. So what do you do to make sure that they don't, take the circular saw and slice off their hand? We try to give them as much guidance as humanly possible so that they can try to navigate these waters. Now, the other part of this that I think gets lost sometimes is it's an efficiency thing. So if I'm starting on a project and I have the universe of options in front of me, well, now analysis paralysis kicks in. I'm beach balling because I'm like, oh, I could do this, I could do that, I could do this. Like, I don't know what to do. So you give people some guidelines, guideposts, North Stars, whatever you want to call it, so that they can go, all right, well, we got one of these and one of these. So now I don't have to worry about spending tons and tons of mental energy figuring out which of 17 different databases I should use. It's going to be this one. Okay, cool. Now I can move to solving business problems, the things that our business partners want us to worry about.
Yeah.
They don't really care about whether we use this database or that database. They just want stuff to work. So let's try to, reduce mental energy to that. I to a certain extent, it's that notion of, well, I just wear the same thing every day because I don't have to think about what I'm wearing. It's that Steve Jobsian, I just wear a black turtleneck kind of a thing
Mm-hmm.
because you have a limited amount of decision energy. We all know how that feels at the end of the day. You're like, what should we have for dinner? It's like, I don't know. I'm out of energy. I don't care. Just order pizza or whatever and be done with it. So to me, I think it's an efficiency thing as well to help our teams free up that energy to focus on things that are frankly more important. And a lot of this we can sort of put it into a set of, well, if this then that kind of conversations.
So then this touches on another thing which I thought was interesting that you bring up in the book, which is like the dream of polyglot programming, and I think you
Yeah.
link to some 2006 little snippet on this about how that would be
Right.
great, right? And
Right.
I think one of the other things they tell the little programmers is
We were so young then.
yeah. One of the things they always tell them is use the right tool for the job, right? And
Absolutely.
which I think, maybe this is a discussion we should bracket, but I think that is usually false. But
Hmm.
in a very pick option 5 kind of way, where like it's more about the choice than, of course you should use the right thing for the job, but sometimes it's better to choose long-term, more efficient and sustainable thing, even if it's not
Right.
like great, right? Like,
Right.
if we were, if it was going way back, if it was like 2000, if it was 1999 and I was suggesting using like XML for configuration on Windows instead of an INI file, like even if XML was far superior because I could use like XPath and XSLTs to transform it between a Linux box and whatever, like you just use an INI file on Windows. That would,
Right.
anyways. Uh, but that's an example of like, I was drawing out how an architect draws these fences, and the
Mhm.
polyglot one is a interesting thought exercise. Polyglot being that like we can use whatever language is makes sense or we would like to for this instance instead of just always having it be in Java or C Sharp or Perl or whatever. And so, like, is it feasible to have like let's say three programming languages on a project long term? Like it seems like you're gonna have JavaScript, so you got
Right.
that. If you're gonna have a
Yep.
web UI, and then you're gonna have some primary programming language, and like it seems like maybe on one project, it's a good idea just to have one programming language, like long term. I don't know.
Yeah.
How has that evolved over time?
No, I would agree with you there that in general, a given project, now, I mean, there's always exceptions, but a given project is going to have one primary server side language, whatever you've chosen, whether that's Java or JavaScript or C Sharp or Clojure, whatever makes you happy, whatever
Mm.
works. There might be certain extenuating circumstances where, well, we do 90% of our coding in Java, but we have this small subset of problems that really has to be done in something else.
All right. Like maybe
And
like a
that,
parser or something, and so you've got some
right.
weird parser language. Yeah.
Yeah, or if we're doing data sciencey stuff, that
Yeah.
tends to not be, one of the quote unquote mainstreamy languages. And that's perfectly reasonable. Now this again is where there needs to be guidance from architecture, to say this is when this is appropriate, this is when this isn't appropriate. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to sort of have a stance as an organization. These are our three primary languages. Choose one and
Mm.
prosper. Now, if you really want something outside of those three, you can come talk to us. And if you have a compelling case, we'll consider it. But in general, these are our primary languages, and that's where we want you to sort of stay. Now, within an organization
Right.
of any size, of course, you're going to have multiple primary languages. I can't envision a world where that's not the case. And, even if you are primarily a Java shop, you will at some point acquire a company that uses JavaScript or C sharp or something, or you will be acquired by a company that uses something else. So there's this idea that we're going to be one and only one. I don't think that's practical today. Prove me wrong, I guess, but that's certainly been my experience that they're
Yeah. Yeah.
at a certain size, you're definitely going to have more than one answer to what is our
Yeah. And
language.
it definitely seems like within a portfolio or an organization, a group. Well, I don't know. I shouldn't. I'll state the statement in the form of a question, as it were. But like so like on one application, you want to have some kind of like primary language stuff, probably,
Yeah.
right? And then let's say you've got like a portfolio of like 500 applications. Now,
Hmm.
putting aside like what ends up happening and accretion and all that, like kind of what's the ideal state you want to shoot for? Are you just like use whatever language makes sense for a project, or would you rather have just like a fewer amount of languages that you're using?
Personally, I'm going to lean towards fewer because the more choices you have, the more ways of doing things there are, the harder it is to support, the more paths you have to
Mm-hmm.
production, the more variability you add into the equation. And the hard part here, I think, is finding where is that Goldilocks number of options. Is
Yeah.
it three? Is it five? It's not unlimited. And what I do think is so interesting, fascinating, painful about sort of this microservice, highly distributed application environment, it does enable us to potentially have 15 different stacks. That doesn't mean it's a good idea, and so again, we have to worry about analysis paralysis. But the bigger concern I have here is, can you stay current on all of those stacks? Do you have a way of getting all of that to production in a way that's repeatable and safe? How many different libraries do you need for that? How many monitoring solutions do you need for that? What happens when you need to move people around your organization? How do you hire for something like that when, well, part of your company uses this, part of your company uses that, part of your company uses something no one's ever heard of? And what's fascinating to me is I think almost every company has the Galapagos Island project.
Mm-hmm.
And usually what happens is some influential engineer finally convinces their management, please let me build this thing in esoteric technology stack, whatever that happens to be for that organization. And they build it and it's super cool and interesting. And then that person leaves. And now it's like, oh, nobody knows how to support the Galapagos Island project because that was just influential engineer and maybe two or three other people. And what do we do now? And it's like rock, paper, scissors to see who has to go into that code base. And so that I think is the other part we have to be very cognizant of as an organization, that we want to avoid that wherever humanly possible. You don't want to have that, especially if it's a key important application. And now it's like, oh, geez, like 70% of our revenue runs through this thing that nobody really understands. Although I don't know, maybe that's software in a nutshell right there, Coté.
What you raise up another interesting quote there. Like, so when you're talking with architects here and there, like, how do they run their like councils of governance nowadays, right? Like in the sense of some
Ubiquitous review board.
yeah, like some decision was made that we're going to use these two programming languages, right? Because we don't
Sure.
want to. We're anti Galapagos or whatever. We're anti archipelago.
Is
To
that better?
delanguage it.
Okay?
Yeah, and it's just sort of like, I would assume part of what you want your architects to do, your enterprise architects, is to put safety measures in place that help
Right.
like de-risk your future and so forth and so on. So someone would think like we should have a limited number of programming languages. So I assume that means like they need to schedule a meeting, and then they got to go to a meeting and someone has to cover that, and then there's the discussion on it, and then they like decide on it, and then they update like a SharePoint site or something. But like, I mean, I'm making a jokey example of that, but like, do you
You're not wrong.
how do you encounter that people like
Sure.
do the act of governance, the motions of it that result in things happening outside of a whiteboard?
So I think, I want to believe we've gotten better at this, because the traditional approach to governance was ineffectual and painful. I think back in my career how many of these, and there's various words that come in front of review board that I've seen, the architecture review board, the change review board, the change review board. I mean, just everything, right? As review board.
Mysterious.
Mysterious review board. And the thing that always stood out to me as I went through these processes is it would force me as the tech lead, the architect, to put in a lot of effort producing some kind of documentation. There was always a template that had a bunch of stuff in it that made no sense. You weren't really sure how to do it. It didn't really apply, but you had to put this together in various chapters and pages and documents. And then you'd have to submit that sometime weeks before your meeting, and it's all this pain of scheduling a meeting, and get to the meeting, and then basically you'd read this documentation out loud to people who should have already read the documentation, and then 7 people would ask the same question, one right after each other,
Mm-hmm.
because they weren't listening or paying attention. It was just like, what's the point of this? You don't know enough about my project to stop it or not. It's just a rubber stamp. What has ultimately happened, I think, in a lot of organizations is they've sort of distributed that better. And so I think about like open source software. I worked at one company where we had a fairly stringent open source sort of acceptance process. You had to go through a bunch of paperwork and get on a meeting and all this. And we eventually migrated that to, hey, listen, we've got an internal repository. That repository is going to be configured that as long as it's a benign license, so it's something that the lawyers have said we don't have a problem with, and there's no known security vulnerabilities, go for it. We're going to distribute that decision making out to the teams, because the teams know best, or we hope they know best, what they need for their situation. Now, hopefully, they've got good senior leadership in place from a technical standpoint, that they're not just randomly grabbing stuff and stitching it together, that they're putting some thought into it, But at a certain stage, to bring in our parenting metaphor again, it's kind of the same as a parent. You got to sort of like trust that your kid's going to do the right thing most of the
Mm-hmm.
time, and if not, well, learning opportunity. But this idea of trying to have it all being centralized just doesn't work today if we're trying to be responsive to changes in the marketplace, changes to our business. How can I wait 3 months to go in front of a group of people who don't have the context, when it's like, I need to make a decision by Thursday?
Yeah.
Because if we can't hit by Thursday, the opportunity's lost, and that's just I think, a reaction to the fact that things are moving more rapidly today. And, you can't afford to sit around and wait and twiddle our thumbs while a group of people who just don't have any context now are going to make potentially an arbitrary decision.
Yeah, yeah. You know, on my my software defined talk podcast, I interviewed Jana Werner, who works at Tesco Bank, and she wrote this paper with Barry O'Reilly. And this was the first time I read some text to someone when I was interviewing her. But she had this great passage that basically, to reduce it, was that your or I should say that your cycle time, like your release time, is determined by your meeting cadence time, right? So like
Oh yeah.
the meeting cadence that the managers go through to approve things, basically whatever, that's the primary thing that like drives how fast you can do something or how slow you can
Sure.
do something.
Sure.
And so just as you were saying, right? Like if there is a cab, that's a change advisory. That's
Yeah.
another thing. But if it's on a 30-day cycle, then you're going to be in a 30-day cycle. And I don't think that that's like it's sort of like maybe a cousin or a sibling of the old Conway thing, right? Like at some
Yeah.
point it was established that we're going to do this every 30 days because that's when it needs to happen. But then as the years go by, it's more that like we're going to do things every 30 days because that's when the meetings happen, right? Which is a
Right.
subtle like change between them. But yeah, I mean that seems to be one of the primary problems with doing enterprise architecture now, is finding out how to I don't know, not get in the way, and yet still do your job, right? Like
Right. Right.
like still bring the value that you do, which is thrilling.
You're hinting at what I've said is like the most dangerous phrase you can say in an organization is, that's how we've always done it. And we all fall into that trap where it's like, well, but we've always done it that way. It's like, but why do you have to do it that way? Is that a requirement? Is that just an artifact of, well, it just so turns out the first Thursday of the month was when somebody scheduled it 5 years ago, and so that's now the cadence we're on? Like, why? I don't know. Maybe they just, that was the time they had free on their calendar. It doesn't mean it's the right way to do it. And this is where, again, if we sort of harness that sort of agile idea of, let's review, is it working or not? And if it's working, great, let's do more of it. Oh, it's not working? Great, let's change it and try to figure out how we can make things better, instead of just like continually pounding our head against the wall and saying, well, there's nothing we can do about this. Actually, there is. You're in control of your software development lifecycle. So if it's not working, change it and try something different. What's the worst thing that could possibly happen? I will say though, a lot of organizations, certainly organizations I've been a part of, they're much happier failing conventionally than potentially succeeding radically. Because if I fail the way everyone else has failed, well, better luck next time. What are you going to do? That's what happens to projects. If you succeed radically, people are like, whoa, how'd you do that? But of course, if you fail radically, well, why didn't you just do it the way everyone else is doing it? Well,
Yeah.
because it would have failed just like those other projects failed. But, well, you get fired because, you failed radically instead of failing conventionally. So
Yes.
I don't know.
Failing in exciting, helpful new ways.
Yeah, and again, that's how we learn, though, and that's the challenge. There is being in an environment that can actually accept that and learn from that. That's the hard part, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It seems like that's something you would expect to see from architects going forward. Is like they're the maker of nets. I was gonna say NetWeaver, but that might like give people some like SOA problems and memories. But they should be the ones who are kind of like making experimentation and moving that fast safe, not preventing
Right.
it from happening. So the last things I wanted to ask about, or the last thing, is our old friend the monolith. Now,
Mm.
I'm starting to build up long term over the decades this category of technology discussion in my head, which is like I think it happens in 3 acts. There's like this new thing is awesome and cool. It's kind of like you were saying earlier that I mentioned this. It's awesome and cool, and we should totally do it, and everyone should run off and do it. And then there's this drawback where it's like, whoa, maybe everyone should not go off and do it, right? Like
Right.
everyone should be using it, but no one should know about it. We'll call this the word we like to use nowadays is it should be boring, right? Like it should
Right.
be ubiquitous, it should be used everywhere, but no one should be using it directly. Kind of like indoor
Yep.
plumbing. Indoor plumbing
Right.
is boring, right? Like no
Right.
one, unless you're a
Thank
professional,
goodness.
don't mess with indoor plumbing. Just
Yeah,
benefit
it's
from
fine.
interfacing
Yep.
with it, right?
Yep.
So we want things to be boring. And then we get to this third thing where we've kind of whipsawed too far into don't worry about it. And it's just like, I don't know, use whatever's right. Right? Like you
Super
you
useful advice. Just do the right thing. It's
use
fine.
what's appropriate. And when I was reading through your book, I was reminded of like the monolith is almost in this area where so I forget when microservices came about. It was around the time when I joined Pivotal in like 2014 or 2015, right? That was when there was
Somewhere in that ballpark.
that was when Martin Fowler had that picture of "You must be tall to ride this ride," which like I think was still probably in every single presentation about microservices, right? And it really struck me at the time that any microservices talk you would go see in 2015, 2016, the first thing they would tell you is very much so like Kubernetes, is that you
Don't
should
do
probably
this.
not be doing this.
Right.
Please don't leave for the next 45 minutes, right? It's just like
Right.
it was absurd. And then slowly things come in, and there was many sort of long things of like monoliths are great. If you need to use them, you should probably start with that. And so I ask you, my coworker Nate, like, come on, shouldn't people just not do monoliths? I mean, I feel like there's this layup that always happens. Like monoliths are great, you should stick with those, and we're never going to talk about them again. It's like, and to put it another way, I was thinking like, I have not seen any good or interesting or any presentations about successful patterns for monoliths. Like no one covers that anymore. There's no new monolith frameworks. There's no like here's how to like SRE your monolith. It's all the only thing people talk about is microservices. And so the sense that I get is that maybe we're just trying to be too nice and we should just be like don't do monoliths, but like I don't want to monolith shame you. Like
Right.
like I don't know what's going on there.
Well, maybe it's to back to your plumbing thing. We don't talk about indoor plumbing anymore either. We talk about home automation because home automation's the cool new
Oh,
hotness,
that's
and I want
good.
to be able to like
Yeah.
clap and then my lights turn on, and I want to
Or the
say
toilet
movie
flushes.
and my toilet flushes. Yeah. Although I guess with the toilet paper as currency that we seem to be living, is toilet paper hard to get in your side of the planet? Pretty
No,
straightforward. I think
no, no.
it's finally got to the point now in the States where it's all sort of balanced itself out again.
Yeah.
But for a while there, like bidet sales were through the roof because can't get toilet paper. Let's put in a bidet now. So maybe internal plumbing got really exciting there for a brief period of time. So to your point, I do think that we don't talk about the monolith because it's not exciting and new, and people don't want to talk about stuff that we've been doing that for 20 years, 30 years, forever. I mean, it is ironic to me that probably the most common pattern to see in architecture is the big ball of mud, and yet that's the
Right.
one we're all like, please don't do this, and yet we just keep doing it. So I'm not quite sure how to feel about that as someone who tries to teach people how to do this the right way. But I think it's important to understand that our applications exist on a continuum of modularity kind of on one axis and like deployability on another axis.
Mm.
And this is something that Spencer Gibb and I were talking about, and he really kind of gave me this sort of vision that I then turned into this kind of slide that I like to show about this. But so the modular or the monolith kind of lives in that it's not modular and it's not very deployable because it's just a big blob that you have to stick out together. And obviously we'd like it to be more modular. That gives us some wins. And what ends up happening is a lot of people, they don't build modular monoliths. They try to build this big ball of mud that they put out on multiple servers, that distributed big ball of mud, which is probably the worst of all worlds. And so as we're trying to get to that magical upper right nirvana of microservices that are deployable and modular, and I can easily swap things in and out, we tend to maybe make some mistakes along the way of getting there. So that's kind of that argument of if you go from the monolith to the modular monolith, then from there you now understand where are those seams in your application, where what makes sense as a microservice. So I think that's part of the challenge. But I feel like so many of these things, it's us learning where the edges of the map actually are
Mm-hmm.
and what benefits from that distributability. Not everything needs to scale to infinity and beyond. Not everything is changing every few minutes, every few days. There's parts of your system that are stable, and this is how much compute I need to run this.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about it spiking up. I think about, I worked on a system for a long time. My user population was 150 people, 200 people, something like that. I never had to worry about thousands of concurrent users. So
Yeah.
that had a very different scaling, so to speak, than if you're Dick's Sporting Goods or something, and you potentially have hundreds of thousands, millions of people all hammering your site the day after Thanksgiving here in the U.S. So it's just a different set of concerns that you have to sort of apply. And again, that's where I think having that more mature vision of this, instead of saying I need to do this because I want to put it on my resume, or it's the new hotness, or I saw something on Twitter. Okay, does it give you value? Do you have the same sort of context and constraints and forces acting on your application? Then great, you should probably use those tools. If not, it's probably just adding accidental complexity to your world, and that's not a win for any of us. What we do is hard enough as it is. We don't need to make it harder just so we can say, hey, I did a microservice serverless functions with Kafka. Like, cool. Did it actually work? Did it help your customers? Did it increase whatever things you care about? Revenue, signups, whatever. That's where I think we need to, again, just sort of have that slightly more adult view of these things, and not get so caught up in kind of the buzz and the new hotness and the hype. But that's one of my
You
standards.
gotta start off with some. I don't know if this is the technical term, but some needs analysis. What is it you need? And,
Right,
and
right.
work from there to make sure that you're using the right tool for the job. I
See,
keep
it all
wanting to
comes down to
say
that.
I keep wanting to say the right tool for the right job, which adds a subtle other layer of analysis to it. Like how does one
Right,
determine the right job? But
right.
yeah, that's it. I like that quadrant you could make there, the modularity versus deployability.
Yeah.
Those are fun things to think about. All right, well, you got to here. Look, you can't see this, but I'm gonna bring up your new book again. Are you ready?
Oh, thank you.
Boom, Responsible Microservices.
Get a load of this guy.
Yeah. You got lucky with the cover they gave you. It's sad that they moved to these blacklight rave kid covers for these pamphlets, but that's okay.
It's funny because the last one of these I did, they actually sent me a couple different examples. Like, do you want this or this? And I actually got a choice. This one, I didn't even see it until it literally showed up. I'm like, oh, that's what the cover is.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess that's the cover of the book then.
Yeah, I mean,
Cool.
speaking of 2016, this is I think the Netflix microservices map, if I recall. I mean, it's not really, but
Probably.
it's the spiralgram sort of
Right,
thing,
right.
which is very appropriate. It's
The
fantastic.
Death Star module, view of
Uh-huh.
the world. It's everything is all marks your, everything talks to everything. Gotta have
That's
that.
right. That's right. So, where can people find this book?
You can get it from us. It's on our website. I don't have the link right at the top of my head, but I'm betting you can probably add that into the
Yeah,
show notes.
it's
That'd be a
sure.
pretty easy
Well,
one.
if you go to, I don't know where I can put it on Twitch because I'm in my 40s. But
Right,
if you go to tanzu.vmware.com/podcast, you can find the show notes where I'll put this in the Tanzu Talk podcast episode. But also, if you just search for Responsible Microservices, I'm sure you'll find it, and you can.
It'll show up on our site somewhere.
But yeah, it's nice. It's
Hey, are you excited for Spring One this week?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's coming up not tomorrow, but September 2nd
It's
and 3rd.
Wednesday and Thursday. I guess for you it's going to be awfully late at night, so I apologize for that.
Oh,
But
it's all right.
I
I've managed it so I don't have to stay up too late. I've got a panel
boy.
coming up talking about managing managers. How about you? You got
Nice.
something coming up?
I'm emceeing the architecture track with my
Oh,
good friend
nice.
Rohit, Rohit Kelper, who's also doing one of our talks in that same track. So he gets to
Uh huh.
juggle both the vMix integration that we were talking about literally just before I got on this call with you,
Ah, yes.
and the Zoom interface. It's pretty crazy. I almost feel like a little bit of a technician because they show you all the different screens and there's like 16 different feeds that
That's
these
right.
guys are mixing together, and it's like, whoa, this is kind of crazy that all this is going on. So I'm super impressed with our tech support people on
Well,
this. I'm very
I
excited
I
about
know
it.
that we were getting our value from them because I had a similar call, and most of the
Right?
call was me on hold, basically, where they
Yeah.
were talking with each other, trying to figure out how to accommodate the strangeness of my setup. So there was a lot of time where I was just sitting there, and they would come back and be like, "All right, I think we've talked about it, and we've this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna do this way. And how did you get to?" And so they're really troubleshooting. Right, things
Yeah.
are going to turn out great. But yeah, you can if you don't know already, it's going to be on September 2nd and 3rd. If you go to spring1.io,
There we go.
and I keep trying not to say Spring One platform. I guess it's just Spring One now. But you go to spring1.io and you can register for free and attend. And we'll probably also, if you can't see it live, you can also see the replays, I assume, at some point, which are always very valuable. But you should tune into it, especially the
I'm
architecture
really
track.
excited about that social track too, though. I mean, there's some
Mm.
cool stuff going on in that. I almost feel bad that I have to MC my own track because I would like to pop my head in there. We actually had our team call last week. We're asking, is any of that going to be recorded? Because there's some cool stuff going on in there. So I'm
What's the
very
answer?
jazzed. Uh, it's unclear if some of the social stuff is going to be recorded. I know all the
Oh,
main talks get recorded, and those will end up on the YouTube channel at some point over the course of the next n number of days, weeks. But
I see.
unclear. That I'm really excited about the speechless guys. I believe they're gonna do the sort of keynote karaoke again, where you get that
Mm.
random deck that auto advances and you have no idea what's in it, and then you just try to present.
Right.
So I think that'll be interesting. I don't know if you remember that from last October when we
Oh,
were playing
sure.
around with that stuff. So I'm interested to see how that all plays out. But I give a lot of credit to our folks who came up with the different tracks. I mean, I know, having helped kind of form the architecture track, we had a ton of great submissions. It's always hard to weed through and have to reject great talks because we have this limited window and you have to jam a lot of stuff in, and it's hard. But
Yeah. Yeah.
gives me a new appreciation for being on the other side of the CFP process.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it too. There's a lot of good tracks that I made sure we're doing, and ones that were not quite as good that I made sure we're not doing. So that'll
Exactly.
that'll be great. Well, where are you in Twitter? Just you can tell
Oh,
people verbally.
NT Schutta, I mostly tweet about travel issues, which don't happen anymore, which means I try to OH things that my family says
Oh
that
yes,
are
now it's
funny and
traveling from
interesting.
the office to the bathroom
Right,
and the
right. Well,
ups and
and
downs
the,
there.
the challenge is, like, my wife is normally right across my shoulder, and I had to tell her, hey, sorry, I have a chat with Coté this morning, so I need you to not be in here, because
Oh,
she gets
well,
mad at
we'll
me
have
because
her
I
on
don't
next
have.
time.
Absolutely, I don't have an indoor voice, and so she has told me repeatedly that I can't, like, if I have a meeting and she has a meeting, like, one of us has to move,
Oh yeah.
because
Oh.
I was doing a call or something and she was having a team meeting and someone said, hey, Christine, I think your TV's on, and she's like, no, that's just my husband.
Uh huh.
So I don't know. I sound fine to me, but she says I'm shouting into my mic. I don't know.
It's
I'll
it's
take her
hard to
word for
say.
it.
Well,
It's hard
I'm
to say.
I'm glad y'all
A
could
lot of
accommodate.
together time. A lot of together time.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. I wasn't paying close enough attention to my decorum, and the other day I was dropping off my son for a play date, and their parents asked me like, "Oh, so you don't have to travel that any much more? How is that going for you?" And I said, "Uh, I kind of like it," and they laughed because you're
It's
supposed to.
it's a mixed it's a
Yeah,
mixed thing,
you're
right?
you're
Because
only you're only supposed to say it's great. I get to spend a
it
lot of time. You can't admit that you only kind of like it.
well, there's pluses and minuses, to say the least. I like the fact that I've gotten to ride my bike a lot more this year than I
Mm-hmm.
normally do. I've played a
Mm-hmm.
lot more golf than I normally do. I do like waking up in my own bed, to be clear. But I mean, there is some benefit in being gone for a little bit of time. There's that, what, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And I guess I didn't look real closely at your travel schedule for the year, but I know I had a lot of interesting trips that were lined up, and it's kind of a bummer when you're like, oh yeah, my family was going to come with me for like this 2 week stretch in Europe, and that didn't happen, so it's unfortunate. I do think we might try some kind of a road trip thing. We're
Mm.
kind of kicking that around to see if this might be an opportunity to take advantage of the fact that we're all kind of virtual
Yeah,
right now.
you got to
So
do
I
that.
don't know.
That's
I don't know.
nice.
We'll see
It's
what
good.
happens.
It's good to get
But
out. All right. Well,
it is.
speaking of
It is.
getting out, we should get out.
It's time. All right.
And
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you as always, my friend.
yeah, that sounds good. Well, as mentioned, if you're listening to the podcast version of this, you can go to tanzu.vmware.com/podcast to find the show notes. You can get that free book, Responsible Microservices, which sounds very adult.
Yes, it does.
Hopefully there's one that's irresponsible microservices. Maybe that could be a lightning talk.
Right.
That you
Yeah, I
have.
like that. I like that.
Yeah, and also if you're seeing this in YouTube or elsewhere, we broadcast these as much as I can, and with many other things on our Twitch stream. So if you go to twitch.tv/VMware Tanzu, if you're not on there right now, you should just subscribe to that, and you'll get notified when we're streaming things. We do stuff every Tuesday, I think Wednesday. I try to do them on Mondays when we record here. Other times, we got lots of content for you while you're.
Rumor has it I'm going to have a show here
Oh,
soon,
that's right.
Coté.
Yeah.
The between chair and keyboard, it's just a matter of time here. I got a whole bunch of people more or less lined up. Now I just need to figure out when I can slot myself into our very busy Twitch stream, what I can claim as my time
Yeah.
on our Twitch stream. And then that'll kind of end up in one of these similar kind of channels. So I'm going to try to take an opportunity to
That's
get to
true.
know some of our friends and
Even
interesting
more of a
people in our
reason.
industry.
And I
That's
think
right.
you're making me realize I'm kind of set up to be the Art Bell of the VMware Tanzu thing, because since I'm in Europe, I can start really early, even around midnight, 1 a.m. And so
Right.
if there's anyone out there who has any have you encountered some code that people tell you is not real? Some sort of organizational mechanisms that seem like some sort of conspiracy that the government is trying to hide? Maybe you can call in for Tanzu Coast to Coast, and we'll talk about
I like
it from
that.
the deserts of Amsterdam.
Tanzu after hours.
Yeah, there we go. Which for me it'll be like normal hours, but that's fine.
Right, right. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. Time zones. How do they work?
That would be great. I need to use my time zone power to talk to the kooks in the cloud native world.
Totally,
Stay up late
totally.
at night and
Cloud native conspiracy theories.
yeah, cloud native kooks. We should have that. All right. Well, with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye bye.